James Thornton, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat alone in his sleek silver Mercedes, his thumb tapping impatiently against the steering wheel. The air conditioner hummed softly, struggling to combat the relentless Kentucky heat. Having built a fortune in finance, Tony was a man accustomed to control. Things usually went his way, but today, he found himself stranded with a flat tire, far from the comforts of his grand estate on the outskirts of town. After multiple failed attempts to reach roadside assistance, he exhaled heavily, realizing he had no choice but to wait. Frustration was just beginning to creep in when, in the distance, he noticed a figure approaching. A boy, no older than 13 or 14, dressed in a faded t-shirt and worn-out sneakers, walked toward him with a purposeful stride. James Thornton observed as the boy's eyes flicked over the car, assessing the situation before giving a polite but assured nod. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady. James Thornton sighed. "Yeah, I do," he admitted, feeling an odd mix of relief and unease. "Tried calling for help, but no signal out here." The boy offered a small, knowing smile. "I can take care of that," he said, already kneeling beside the tire. "My grandpa taught me how to change one last summer." "You got a spare?" James Thornton gestured toward the trunk, watching as the boy swiftly retrieved the tools. The kid worked with a quiet confidence, his hands moving skillfully, as if he had done this 100 times before. James Thornton, a man used to being in charge, found himself oddly humbled by the effortless precision of the boy's movements. For a moment he considered offering help, but the boy remained focused, never even looking up. In just a few minutes the job was done. The boy wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped back. "All set," he said simply, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. James Thornton reached for his wallet, pulling out a few crisp bills. "Here, take this, I really appreciate your help." But the boy took a step back, shaking his head politely. "No, sir, I don't need anything. Just glad to help." James Thornton stood there, money still in hand, watching as the boy turned and walked away down the road. The interaction left him unsettled, though he couldn't quite explain why. He slipped the money back into his wallet and got into his car, glancing at the rearview mirror as the boy's silhouette faded into the distance. For the rest of the drive, James Thornton's thoughts kept circling back to the boy. There was something rare about him, a quiet dignity, a self-assurance that had nothing to do with wealth or status, but came from somewhere deeper. That night, sitting alone in his lavish home, James Thornton found himself unable to shake the image of the boy walking away, taking nothing but the satisfaction of having helped. As he settled into the leather chair in his study, surrounded by shelves of books he rarely touched, he stared at his untouched dinner, perfectly prepared steak and asparagus. The house was silent except for the slow ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Over the years, Tony had dealt with countless people, business partners, employees, investors. Every interaction had been transactional, always an exchange, a deal, an expectation. But this boy, this stranger, had helped him for no reason at all. He took a slow sip of his scotch, the memory of the boy's confident smile playing in his mind. The kid didn't have much. His worn shoes, his faded clothes, the dust on his hands, everything told a story. And yet, he carried himself with a kind of integrity that money couldn't buy. The next morning, Tony couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unfinished. Maybe it was gratitude, maybe curiosity. Whatever it was, he found himself driving back down that same stretch of road, scanning for any sign of the boy. Hours passed as he stopped at gas stations and diners, asking if anyone had seen a kid matching the description. Most shook their heads until finally, an older woman at a small cafe paused while wiping her hands on her apron. "Sounds like you're talking about Eli," she said with a knowing nod. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan," James Thornton, making a mental note. "Thank you." Harlan was a small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians, about an hour away. The drive was beautiful, but Tony barely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. Who was this boy? What kind of family raised someone like that? When he arrived, the town was quiet, lined with modest homes and small shops. After asking around, he was eventually directed to a small house on the edge of town. It was worn but well kept, with a front porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. James Thornton parked and hesitated for a moment. What was he even going to say? Taking a deep breath, he knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s. She looked tired but kind, her sharp eyes studying him curiously. "Can I help you?" she asked. James Thornton cleared his throat. "Good morning. I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Eli, right? He helped me when I had a flat tire." Her face softened instantly. a proud smile touching her lips. That sounds like my Eli. He's always helping folks. I just wanted to thank him properly, Tony said. He wouldn't take anything from me yesterday, she nodded, stepping aside. He's out back, you're welcome to wait. As James Thornton stepped inside, he took in his surroundings. The furniture was old but clean, the walls decorated with family photos and hand-drawn pictures, likely from a younger Eli. It was nothing like his own home, with its expensive artwork and polished floors, and yet somehow, this place felt warmer, more alive. He followed her out into the backyard where Elijah was busy mending the broken fence. The boy glanced up, surprise flickering in his eyes when he saw Tony standing there. Hey, mister, Elijah greeted, wiping his hands across his worn-out jeans. What brings you here? James Thornton smiled faintly, feeling an unusual nervousness settle over him. I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I needed it most, and I haven't been able to get it out of my mind since. Elijah gave a small shrug, his face calm and sincere. It wasn't a big deal, but for James Thornton it was. It was more than just a simple favor, and he had made up his mind that the boy deserved to know that. Elijah leaned back against the wooden fence, his curious eyes fixed on Tony. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet confidence in the boy's presence made James Thornton feel almost out of place, as if somehow he was the one being evaluated. You might not realize how big of a deal it was. Tony finally broke the silence. Most people don't offer help without wanting something in return. Elijah tilted his head slightly, almost confused by the thought. I don't see it that way. If somebody needs help and I can give it up, why wouldn't I? The simplicity in his words struck Tony harder than he expected. His gaze drifted past Elijah, taking in the small yard, the fence patched together with whatever wood they could find, uneven patches of grass scattered across the ground. The rusty swing set stood off to the side, its chains hanging loose and broken. Yet everything about this place spoke of a family making the best out of what little they had. You've got a good head on your shoulders, James Thornton said genuinely. Your mother must be proud. Elijah's face brightened, glancing toward the house. She works hard. I just try to help where I can. The words stirred something deep inside James Thornton, a distant memory of his own childhood in a modest home just like this one. His parents had worked day and night to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of those lessons, buried under years of chasing wealth and power. A flicker of regret crossed his mind. I'd like to do something for you and your family, James Thornton said softly. Elijah's smile faded, his posture stiffening. We're okay, mister. We don't need anything. It's not about needing something, James Thornton insisted. It's about doing what's right. You helped me. Now let me return the favor. Before Elijah could respond, the screen door creaked open. His mother stepped onto the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. Elijah, wash up before lunch. Her gaze shifted toward Tony, curiosity in her eyes. Would you like to join us? It's nothing special, but you're more than welcome. The warmth in her voice caught Tony off guard. He wasn't used to such open invitations. No pretense, no expectations, just simple kindness. I'd like that, he said quietly, stepping inside. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but every detail was set with care. James Thornton sat down, feeling oddly out of place in his tailored suit amidst the humble surroundings. Elijah washed his hands and joined them, his smile never fading. As they ate, James Thornton found himself drawn into their stories. Elijah talking about school, his dream of becoming an engineer, his mother sharing quiet stories of the community, where neighbors looked out for one another like family. With each passing moment, Tony felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him, a warmth that had been missing from his life for far too long. For all the luxury and wealth he'd accumulated over the years, his grand estate had never felt this, alive. After lunch, as they cleared the table, James Thornton turned to Elijah's mother. You've done an incredible job raising him. He's got more heart than most men I've ever met. Her eyes shimmered with gratitude. Thank you. Times haven't always been easy, but we've learned to appreciate the small things. James Thornton nodded slowly, his mind already turning over ideas, not out of pity but out of respect. This family had given him something without even knowing it, a reminder of what truly mattered. When he drove away that afternoon, the weight he'd carried for years felt just a little lighter, and for the first time in a long while, he had a purpose bigger than himself. Elijah and his mother deserved more than patched fences, more than worn-out furniture. They deserved stability, and someone to acknowledge the quiet strength they carried every single day. The very next morning, James Thornton started making calls one after another, old colleagues, contractors, suppliers. By midday, a full plan was set in motion. Within a week, trucks started pulling up outside Elijah's home, workers unloading materials. James Thornton stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing every step like a man on a mission, while Elijah and his mother stood watching, stunned. "You didn't have to do this," Elijah's mother spoke, her voice trembling. "We've always managed on our own." James Thornton turned to her, his eyes genuine, sincere. "You haven't just managed, you've survived, thrived, but you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. Let me give something back." Elijah stood quieter than usual, his thoughtful eyes fixed on Tony. James Thornton crouched down, meeting him eye to eye. "You taught me something, Elijah. Helping people isn't always about money. It's about showing up, and I want to show up for you." Weeks passed, and the small, worn-out house slowly began to transform. The sagging porch replaced with fresh, sturdy wood, the leaky roof fixed, the rusty old swing set out back, gone. A brand new one stood in its place. Inside, walls painted, floors polished, the kitchen upgraded with modern appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help, carrying planks, sweeping debris, but James Thornton always stopped him with a soft smile. "Your job is to just be a kid for a little." While, still, Elijah couldn't resist sneaking out, his eyes lighting up as he watched the crew measure, cut, build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed his curiosity, inviting him over to help measure wood planks. Before long, Elijah was asking endless questions about tools, construction, blueprints, his excitement spreading through the entire crew. From a distance, Tony watched, that warm flicker of purpose stirring inside him, a feeling he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long time, he was doing something that mattered, something bigger than himself. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the house was nearly complete. Elijah's mother stood on the new porch, eyes glistening. "This isn't just a house anymore." Her voice cracked. "It's a home. I don't know how we'll ever thank you." James Thornton shook his head gently. "You already have. You reminded me what life is really about. Family, connection, purpose. If anything, I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day felt like a celebration. Neighbors stopped by, dropping off jars of homemade jam, freshly baked bread, even a small potted plant. Elijah's laughter filled the yard, running around, showing his friends the brand new swing set, the freshly painted walls. Inside, the house that once felt tired and broken now radiated life. James Thornton stood on the porch, leaning against the brand new railing, watching it all unfold, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He hadn't felt joy like this in years. Simple, unfiltered, pure joy. That comes from watching someone else thrive. Elijah's mother walked over, a cup of iced tea in hand. "You didn't just fix a house." Her voice soft. "You gave us hope, and maybe you found something for yourself too." James Thornton took a slow sip. "I have," he admitted. "I spent so many years chasing the wrong things. Money, status, influence. None of it ever felt like this." As the sun dipped into the horizon, Elijah climbed up onto the porch, his boundless energy still buzzing. "Mr. Tony," his little voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking, I want to do something like this one day. I want to help people, too." James Thornton's hand rested gently on the boy's shoulder. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness started all of this. Don't ever lose that." That evening, the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the sky melt from gold into deep orange. There was a warmth in the air, not just from the fading sun, but something deeper: gratitude, connection, purpose. When it was time for James Thornton to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car, the boy's wide grin, his mother's tearful smile, etched into James Thornton's memory. As he drove away, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The weeks that followed brought even more change. Elijah's curiosity for construction turned into a full-blown passion. James Thornton arranged for him to shadow the workers, soaking up every bit of knowledge like a sponge. And as for Tony, Harlan wasn't just a stop on his journey anymore. It felt like coming home. He wasn't an outsider in their lives anymore. He was part of something bigger, and for the first time in years, he was content. The story ended exactly where it began, in a small town with a big heart, where one act of kindness from a little boy reminded a lost man of life's greatest truth. It's never about what you have, it's about what you give.